The worst betrayals in life do not happen with a bang. There is no cinematic crash of thunder, no shattering glass, and rarely is there screaming. The events that dismantle a man's soul usually happen in a whisper. I was 20 minutes early to the Meridian. It was an excessive habit of mine, a byproduct of being an architect who specialized in structural integrity. I like to assess the load-bearing walls of a situation before I stepped into it. Tonight was our 5th anniversary. 5 years of what I believed was a partnership built on the same steel and concrete principles I applied to my skyscrapers. I had checked the coat check, confirmed the vintage bottle of Pinot Noir I had ordered 3 weeks ago, and was making my way toward the private booths in the back, the ones shrouded in heavy velvet curtains for the sake of discretion. I heard her voice before I saw her. Elna had a specific tone she used when she was negotiating. It was a drop in octave, a smoothing of the vowels that sounded seductive to strangers, but struck me as purely tactical. I paused. She wasn't at our table. She was standing in the narrow, dimly lit corridor leading to the terrace, her back to me, phone pressed to her ear. I should have announced myself. I should have walked up, wrapped my arms around her waist, and kissed her neck. But the tone stopped me. It was too intimate, yet too calculating. "He suspects nothing, Julian." "Stop pushing me," Elena whispered. Her hand was making frantic, chopping motions in the air. "You know how the finances work. If I leave now, I leave with nothing. The pre-vesting period ends next month." I stood frozen in the shadow of a decorative pillar. My heart, usually a steady drum, skipped a beat and then began to race with a sickening, erratic rhythm. Julian. The name landed like a stone in my gut. "I am not stalling," she hissed, glancing over her shoulder. I pressed myself back against the dark wood paneling, holding my breath. He's functional. He's safe. Look, you are the dream, Julian. We both know that. But dreams don't pay for the loft in Tribeca or your studio fees. Ethan is the backup plan. He's the insurance policy. You keep the policy until the payout clears. The world tilted on its axis. Backup plan. The words didn't just hurt, they humiliated. They recontextualized every kindness, every dinner, every moment of intimacy over the last 5 years. I wasn't a husband. I wasn't a lover. I was an insurance policy. I was a safety net being used to subsidize a life she was planning with another man. A man named Julian. She laughed then, a low, throaty sound I hadn't heard directed at me in years. "Just wait. 3 more weeks. Once the 5-year clause hits, the assets are communal regardless of fault. Then I can be obsolete to him, and he can be a memory to me. I have to go. He's always early." She hung up. I had seconds to make a decision. The primal part of my brain wanted to storm out there, grab her phone, and shatter it against the marble floor. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, to create the scene that this melodrama deserved. But then the architect in me took over. Structure, foundation, load-bearing walls. If I confronted her now, she would spin it. She would gaslight me. She would claim I misunderstood, or worse, she would leverage the divorce immediately, leading to a messy, prolonged battle where she might actually get what she wanted just to make her go away. "Obsolete," she had said. I turned on my heel and walked silently back to the maitre d' station. My hands were shaking, a fine tremor that rattled the keys in my pocket. I forced myself to breathe. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. The box breathing technique I used before boardroom presentations. "Mr. Vance?" The hostess smiled. "Your wife just arrived." "I know," I said. My voice sounded foreign, hollow, like it was coming from a radio in another room. "I just needed some air. Is she at the table?" "She is just seating herself now." I walked to the table. Elena was there, smoothing her silk dress, looking radiant. She looked up and smiled, that dazzling, practiced smile that had convinced me to merge my life with hers. "Happy anniversary, darling," she said, reaching for my hand. "I was worried you got stuck in traffic." I looked at her hand. The diamond on her finger was something I had spent 6 months selecting. Now it looked like a prop. I took her hand. Her skin was cool. "I'm never late, Elena," I said. "You know that." I know, she purred, leaning in to kiss my cheek. You're my rock, always reliable. The dinner was a masterclass in dissociation. I sat there cutting into my steak, watching the woman I loved perform the role of a devoted wife. I watched her eyes. They didn't smile when her mouth did. She checked her phone under the table twice. Is everything okay? Ethan? She asked halfway through the meal. You're quiet tonight. Just work, I lied. We have a structural issue with the generic contract for the new high-rise. The foundation isn't as secure as the client thinks it is. I might have to pull the plug on the whole project. She took a sip of wine, her eyes glazing over slightly. She hated when I talk shop. Well, you always figure it out. You always have a contingency plan. Yes, I said, looking directly into her eyes, searching for a trace of guilt and finding none. I always have a contingency plan. We finished the bottle of wine. I paid the bill, a bill that likely cost more than this Julian made in a month. As we walked out of the restaurant into the cool Chicago wind, she shivered and huddled into my coat. It was a gesture that used to make me feel protective, masculine. Now it felt parasitic. We drove home in silence. The city lights blurred past, meaningless streaks of color. My mind was racing, accessing files I hadn't thought about in half a decade. When we got home, Elena went straight to the bathroom to start her nightly routine. I'll be out in a minute, honey, she called out, her voice light, unburdened. I went into my study and locked the door. My hands were steady now. The shock had metabolized into a cold, hard resolve. I walked over to the wall safe hidden behind the framed blueprint of my first major project. I spun the dial, left, right, left. The heavy steel door clicked open. Inside were our passports, were some emergency cash, and a thick leather binder. I pulled the binder out. The dust jacket read, Vance & Vance, Estate and Asset Agreement, 2021. I sat at my mahogany desk and flipped past the standard legalese, past the real estate holdings, past the life insurance policies. I turned to page 42. Subsection 8, the Morality Investing Protocol. It was a clause my father, a ruthless corporate attorney, had insisted on. Elena had signed it laughing, calling it unromantic and archaic, claiming she didn't care about the money, only me. She had skimmed it. She had likely forgotten it existed. The clause was specific. It detailed that the transfer of Class A assets, which included the house, the investment portfolio, and the spousal support guarantee, was contingent on a 5-year vesting period. But there was a subclause. Clause 8B, breach of fidelity. If a party is found to have engaged in extramarital affairs or acts of bad faith, resulting in the deterioration of the union prior to the vesting date, all rights to unvested assets are immediately forfeited, and the breaching party shall be rendered obsolete in regards to claimable equity. I looked at the calendar on my desk. Today was October 14th. The vesting date was November 1st. She had mentioned 3 more weeks on the phone. She was waiting out the clock. She thought she was playing a waiting game. I closed the binder. Obsolete, I whispered to the empty room. I wasn't her backup plan. She had just triggered her own expiration date. I sat in the leather chair of my study for another hour, the silence of the house pressing against my eardrums. The binder was back in the safe, locked behind 3 inches of steel, but the words I had read were branded onto my retinas. Clause 8B, forfeiture on breach. It was a lifeline, a weapon, and a tragedy all wrapped into one sterile paragraph. Eventually, the clock on the mantel chimed midnight. If I stayed in the study, it would break the pattern. A man who suspects nothing comes to bed. A man who is merely an insurance policy dutifully lies down next to the asset he is protecting. I stood up, my joints stiff, and walked down the hallway to the master bedroom. The room was bathed in the soft blue glow of the streetlights filtering through the sheer curtains. Elena was already asleep, or at least she was performing sleep. She lay on her side, one arm draped over the duvet, her breathing rhythmic and shallow. In the dim light, she looked innocent. That was the most terrifying part. There was no scarlet letter branded on her skin, no visible mark of the corruption I had heard in her voice just hours ago. She looked exactly like the woman I had promised to cherish until death parted us. I slipped into bed, careful not to disturb the mattress. Usually I would reach out and touch her shoulder, a subconscious check-in before I drifted off. Tonight I kept my hands at my sides. The space between us, barely 6 inches, felt like a chasm filled with broken glass. I didn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, dissecting the phone call I had overheard. He's functional. He's safe. The words looped in my mind like a corrupted audio file. I thought about the last 5 years, the vacations to Tuscany, the renovation of her parents' lake house which I had funded, the endless dinner parties where I played the supportive husband to her aspiring socialite ambitions. Was it all a performance? Or had there been a time when she actually loved me before I became just a backup plan? It didn't matter anymore. Nostalgia was a luxury I couldn't afford. In architecture, once a foundation is compromised, you don't mourn the original blueprints. You assess the damage and decide whether to reinforce or demolish. Elena had made that decision for me. Morning arrived with a cruel gray light. I heard the alarm on her phone buzz, and her hand shot out to silence it. "Morning, handsome," she murmured, rolling over to face me. Her eyes were puffy with sleep, her hair a mess. It was intimate. It was domestic. It made my stomach turn. "Morning," I managed to say. My voice was rough, which helped hide the lack of warmth. "I had too much wine last night," she groaned, rubbing her temples. "But it was a lovely dinner. Thank you, Ethan." "It was memorable," I said, sliding out of bed before she could try to initiate any physical contact. "I have an early site visit. I need a shower." "On a Saturday?" she asked, propping herself up on one elbow. "Crisis management," I called back over my shoulder as I walked into the bathroom. "Structure issues." Under the spray of the hottest water I could stand, I washed the feeling of the bed sheets off my skin. I needed to be sharp. Today was the first day of the rest of my life, the life where I was the architect of her downfall. When I stepped out, wrapped in a towel, Elena was sitting at her vanity, applying moisturizer. I watched her through the reflection in the mirror. I looked for the telltale signs of guilt, a nervous tick, an avoidance of eye contact, a hesitation. There was nothing. She was humming a soft tune, looking at her reflection with satisfaction. She was happy. Why wouldn't she be? She was 2 weeks away from a massive payout. She thought she had pulled off the perfect heist, stealing 5 years of a man's life, and half his net worth without firing a shot. "I was thinking," she said, catching my eye in the mirror, "for the winter break, maybe we should book that chalet in Aspen. You know, celebrate properly after your big project is done." The audacity was breathtaking. She was planning vacations on my dime with a timeline that extended past her planned departure. Or perhaps Aspen was where she intended to drop the bomb. A scenic breakup in the snow, leaving me with the bill while she flew back to Julian. "Aspen sounds expensive," I said, buttoning my shirt. "The markets are volatile right now." She paused, the jar of cream hovering in her hand. "Since when do you worry about the cost of a vacation? You've always said experiences are investments." "Investments need a return," I said, tightening my tie. "I'm just looking at the ledger differently these days." She turned around, a flicker of concern finally crossing her face. "Are we in trouble, financially?" I saw the panic in her eyes. It wasn't concern for us. It was concern for her. If the money dried up before she could cash out, her plan with Julian would crumble. Julian, the dream, clearly didn't have the funds to support her high-maintenance reality. "No," I reassured her, smoothing my jacket. "We are fine, just cautious. I have to go." I walked over and kissed her on the forehead. It felt like kissing a statue. "I love you, Elena." I needed to say it. I needed her to believe nothing had changed. "I love you too," she replied automatically. The lie hung in the air between us, heavy and toxic. I drove to my office in the Loop, the city of Chicago waking up around me. The weekends were usually quiet at the firm, which was exactly what I needed. I swiped my key card and entered the silent glass tower. My office was on the 42nd floor, overlooking the lake. It was a fortress of solitude. I sat at my desk and didn't turn on the computer. Instead, I took out a fresh, legal pad and a pen. I wrote one word at the top, Julian. I knew nothing about him other than his name and the fact that he was an artist, or at least someone who needed studio fees. Elena moved in circles that I generally avoided, gallery openings, charity auctions for obscure avant-garde collectives, the creative scene that looked at corporate architects like me as necessary evils who wrote checks. I needed to know who I was up against. If I was going to trigger the morality clause, I needed irrefutable proof. The contract required evidence of bad faith or infidelity. A phone conversation I overheard wouldn't hold up in court. It was hearsay. I needed photos. I needed timestamps. I needed hotel receipts. I pulled my phone out and scrolled through my contacts until I found a number I hadn't used in 3 years. Marcus Thorne, private. Marcus was a former corporate litigator who had burned out and pivoted to private investigation. He specialized in high-asset divorces and corporate espionage. He was expensive, discreet, and ruthless. I pressed call. Ethan Vance, Marcus's voice rasped on the second ring. I haven't heard from you since the merger. To what do I owe the pleasure? Are you building a new wing for the museum? No, Marcus. I need a consultation. Today. I don't work weekends, Ethan. You know that. I'm at the office. I'll authorize a retainer of $10,000 immediately if you can meet me here in an hour. There was a brief silence on the other end, the sound of a lighter clicking, then an exhale. 10,000 buys you a lot of my weekend. Is everything all right? No, I said, looking at the empty chair across from my desk where Elena used to sit when she'd visit me for lunch in the early days. I have a structural failure. I need you to help me document the collapse. I'm on my way. I hung up and stood by the window, looking down at the ant-like cars moving along Lakeshore Drive. The anger was still there, burning like a low fever, but it was being overtaken by a cold, mechanical focus. Elena thought I was a safe choice, the boring choice, the backup plan. She had forgotten what I actually did for a living. I didn't just design pretty facades. I calculated stress points. I knew exactly how much pressure a structure could take before it snapped, and I knew exactly where to place the charges to bring the whole thing down in a controlled demolition. She wanted to be free? I would set her free, but first I was going to ensure that when she walked out the door, she would be walking into a wasteland. The elevator chimed in the distance. The game had begun. Marcus Thorne arrived 40 minutes later, carrying the smell of stale tobacco and expensive cologne. He didn't look like a detective from a noir film. He looked like exactly what he was, a burned-out corporate lawyer who had traded the courtroom for the shadows. He wore a cashmere sweater and jeans, carrying a slim leather laptop case instead of a notepad. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't offer a platitude about marriage being difficult. He simply walked to the conference table in my office, set down his laptop, and looked at the panoramic view of Lake Michigan. Nice view, Marcus said, his voice gravelly. Hard to see the cracks from up here? I need a name, Marcus, I said, bypassing the small talk. I sat opposite him, my hands clasped on the polished wood. First name Julian, involved in the art scene. Likely owns a gallery or a studio. Elena has been mentioning investments in emerging artists lately. I suspect that's the cover. Marcus opened his laptop. Julian, art scene, Chicago, Elena Vance's social circle. Give me 10 minutes. The silence that followed was filled only by the aggressive clacking of Marcus's keyboard. I stood up and paced the length of the office. My reflection in the glass looked like a stranger, a man in a suit, composed, wealthy, yet utterly hollowed out. I felt like a building where the termites had eaten everything but the paint. Got him, Marcus said, not looking up. I stopped pacing. That was fast. People like this want to be found, Ethan. Narcissism leaves a digital footprint larger than a carbon one. Marcus spun the laptop around to face me. On the screen was a high-resolution photo from a lifestyle blog titled Chicago's New Bohemians. The man in the center of the frame was striking, I had to admit. He had messy, intentionally unkempt dark hair, a jawline that could cut glass, and he was wearing a linen shirt unbuttoned halfway down his chest. He held a glass of wine with a looseness that suggested he didn't have a care in the world. Julian Vane, Marcus read from the bio, owner of the Vane Collective in Wicker Park, specializes in disruptive modernism. He's 34, failed painter turned curator. According to public records, his gallery has been on the verge of bankruptcy 3 times in the last 2 years. I stared at the face of the man who had reduced me to an insurance policy. He was everything I was not. I was structure, geometry, and discipline. Julian Vane was chaos, emotion, and impulse. I wore tailored suits. He wore artistic disarray. I built skyscrapers that housed thousands. He threw paint at canvases and called it disruptive. It was the classic cliché, the bored, wealthy wife seeking the thrill of the starving artist. But looking at him, I didn't just feel jealousy. I felt a profound sense of insult. Elena wasn't leaving me for a better man. She was leaving me for a project. Dig deeper, and I said, my voice cold. She said something about funding. She said I was the backup plan. That implies she's pouring resources into him. Let's look at the money, Marcus said, switching tabs. I'll need access to the joint accounts, the ones you don't usually monitor. I gave him the passwords. I had always prided myself on trust. We had a joint operating account for household expenses, and Elena had a discretionary account that I topped up monthly. I rarely looked at the line items. As long as the total didn't exceed the budget, I didn't care if she bought shoes or spa treatments. Marcus linked his software to the banking API. Lines of data began to scroll down the screen. Here, Marcus pointed a manicured finger at the screen. Look at the pattern. I leaned in. August 12th, $4,500, Vane Collective, consulting fee. August 28th, $2,000, cash withdrawal, ATM Wicker Park. September's 05, $8,000, art acquisition, untitled number 4. September 15th, $3,200, Vane Collective, space rental. The list went on. Thousands of dollars, tens of thousands. She's bleeding you, Marcus said softly. She's not just buying art, Ethan. Look at this transfer from last week. $5,000 for studio renovation. She is paying his rent. She is keeping his business afloat. I felt the blood drain from my face. It was one thing for her to give her heart to another man. It was another thing entirely for her to use my labor, my long nights at the firm, my stress, and my success to subsidize her affair. I was paying for the hotel rooms. I was paying for the wine they drank. I was keeping the lights on in the gallery where they likely laughed about how boring and predictable I was. I am the silent partner in my own cuckolding, I muttered. It gets worse, Marcus said, clicking on another window. I cross-referenced Julian's credit history. It's shot, maxed out cards, a lien on his car. Without this influx of cash from the Vane Collective sales, which are almost certainly fake sales to your wife, he'd be evicted. She isn't just his lover, Ethan. She's his lifeline. It all clicked into place. The conversation I overheard. Dreams don't pay for the loft in Tribeca. Julian wasn't a rich artist sweeping her off her feet. He was a parasite looking for a new host. And Elena? She was deluding herself into thinking she was the patron of the arts, the muse who saved the genius. She needed my money to vest so she could take half, and then she would use that half to bankroll Julian's genius life in New York. I was the engine that was going to power their escape. She's bought 3 paintings in the last 6 months, I noted, pointing at the ledger. Where are they? They aren't in our house. Storage, probably, Marcus said. Or they don't exist. It's money laundering, essentially. She transfers the money for a painting. He keeps the cash, and no product ever moves. I stood up and walked back to the window. The anger I felt now was different. It wasn't the hot, reactive anger of the night before. It was a cold, heavy thing, like wet concrete settling in my chest. I need proof, I said. This is circumstantial. A judge could argue she's just a bad investor with a hobby. I need proof of the affair. I need to link the money to the sex. I can have a team on him by tonight, Marcus said, closing the laptop. If they are as arrogant as you say, they'll slip up, especially if she thinks she's in the clear until the vesting date. Does she have a routine? Yoga on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Charity board meetings on Wednesday nights, I recited. The lies tasted like ash in my mouth. Wednesday nights. She always comes home late, says the meetings run over. Wednesday is tomorrow, Marcus noted. I'll have a photographer outside the Vane Collective. If she goes there, we'll get it. We'll get them entering, leaving, maybe even something through a window if they're careless. Do it, I said. I want everything. Photos, timestamps, GPS logs. Marcus stood up and slid his laptop into the case. One piece of advice, Ethan, from a lawyer, not a friend. Go ahead. Don't change. Don't start drinking. Don't start yelling. If you change your behavior now, she'll spook. If she spooks, she might file for divorce tomorrow to freeze the assets before you can trigger the clause. You have to play the part of the oblivious husband for 2 more weeks. Can you do that? I thought about the dinner last night. I thought about her lying to my face about the lovely evening. I thought about the thousands of dollars of my money flowing into Julian Vane's pocket while he mocked me. I'm an architect, Marcus, I said, turning to face him. My expression was stone. I know how to build a facade that hides the steel underneath. I can play the part. Good, Marcus said, heading for the door. I'll send you the bill. And Ethan? Yes? When you drop the hammer, make sure you don't miss. I won't, I promised. When the door clicked shut, I was alone again. I looked down at the city. Somewhere out there in Wicker Park, Julian Vane was likely waking up in a bed paid for by my sweat, perhaps texting my wife about their future. They thought I was obsolete. They thought I was a static object, a resource to be mined and discarded. But they had forgotten the most dangerous thing about a backup plan. It's designed to activate when the primary system fails, and their system was about to fail catastrophically. I sat back down at my desk and opened my work email. I had a skyscraper to design, and I had a marriage to dismantle. I would do both with the same precision. I typed a quick email to Elena. Subject: dinner message. Managing a crisis at the site today. Might be late. Don't wait up. Love you. I hit send. The lie came easily now. It was just another brick in the wall I was building around her, a wall that would eventually close in and leave her with absolutely nowhere to run. The conference room at Thorne & Associates wasn't designed for comfort. It was designed for intimidation. Located in a converted industrial loft in the West Loop, the exposed brick and steel beams mirrored the man who owned it. Marcus sat at the head of a glass table that looked fragile, but was likely bulletproof. Spread out before us was the physical dissection of my marriage. Financial statements, surveillance photos from the last 48 hours, and the centerpiece, the Oak Haven Agreement. It was Wednesday evening. Elena believed I was at a late-night zoning hearing for the new municipal library project. In reality, I was watching Marcus circle a paragraph in red ink. "This is the kill switch, Ethan," Marcus said, tapping the paper with the cap of his pen. "It's rare to see a prenup this watertight. Your father really didn't trust her, did he?" "My father didn't trust anyone who didn't have a billable hour rate," I replied, staring at the document. "He called it asset immunization. I thought he was being paranoid. I almost threw this document away the night before the wedding." "Be glad you didn't," Marcus said. He slid the document toward me. "Let's walk through the mechanics. This isn't just a standard infidelity clause. Most prenups simply limit alimony if someone cheats. This is a vesting schedule, similar to corporate stock options. It treats the marriage as a tenure-based employment." I looked at the bold text. Class A assets, real estate, investment portfolios, spousal support trusts, shall vest to the beneficiary, Elena Vance, only upon the completion of 60 full months of continuous, uninterrupted marital union. 60 months, I murmured. 5 years. "Exactly," Marcus continued, his voice clinical. "Until the clock strikes midnight on November 1st, Elena Vance technically owns nothing. She is a beneficiary in waiting. She has access to the accounts, yes, but that access is revocable. The assets haven't transferred title. She is living in a house she doesn't own, driving a car she doesn't hold the title to, and spending money that is legally yours." "And the breach?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. I needed to hear it said aloud. I needed the legal reality to override the emotional hesitation that still lingered in the back of my mind. Marcus flipped the page. Subsection 8b. If the beneficiary engages in acts of bad faith, including but not limited to extramarital affairs, prior to the vesting date, the vesting schedule is terminated immediately. The beneficiary forfeits all claims to unvested assets and is liable for the repayment of any funds misappropriated for the purpose of said bad faith acts. Marcus leaned back, crossing his arms. "In plain English, if we prove she is sleeping with Julian Vane before November 1st, she leaves with the clothes on her back. No alimony, no settlement, no house. She doesn't even get to keep the jewelry if it was purchased with joint funds." I stared at the paper. It was brutal. It was total devastation. For a moment, I felt a flicker of pity. Elena was living in a fantasy world where she was weeks away from a multi-million-dollar payday that would fund her bohemian life with Julian. She was counting chickens that weren't just unhatched, they were already dead. She thinks she's safe, I said quietly. She told Julian on the phone, wait 3 more weeks. She knows about the vesting period. She's just counting the days. She's counting the days to a payday, Marcus corrected. You need to be counting the days to the execution. But we have a problem. What problem? The proof, Marcus said. He reached for a manila envelope and slid it across the glass. My guy tailed her yesterday. She went to the Vane Collective. She stayed for 3 hours. I opened the envelope. The photos were grainy but clear enough. Elena entering the gallery in a trench coat. Elena laughing in the window with Julian. Elena handing him an envelope, likely cash. But there was no smoking gun, no kiss, no intimacy that couldn't be explained away as friendship or business. It's suggestive, Marcus admitted, but it's not definitive. If you trigger the clause with this, her lawyer will argue she was there as a patron. They'll claim the money was a loan or a purchase. They'll drag this out in court for 2 years. By the time it settles, the vesting date will have passed, and a judge might rule in her favor just to end the litigation. So we need them in bed, I said, the words tasting like bile. We need undeniable proof of a romantic relationship, Marcus said. We need them in a hotel room, or we need digital correspondence that explicitly details the affair. Texts, emails, voice notes. I thought about Elena's phone. She never let it out of her sight. It was password protected, Face ID locked. I can't get into her phone. She sleeps with it under her pillow. Then we let her hang herself, Marcus said. You said she wants to go to Aspen? She mentioned it. Suggest a weekend away, Marcus proposed, his eyes narrowing. Tell her, you have to work, but she should go ahead and relax. Send her to a high-end resort. If she thinks you're busy and she's alone in a luxury hotel, she'll call him. She might even fly him out. And if she does, we'll have a camera in the hallway and a microphone in the room next door. I shook my head. No, Aspen is too far. If she goes there, I lose control of the environment. I need this to happen here, in Chicago, where I can see it. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the grid of the West Loop. I thought about the architecture of a trap. You don't chase the target, you create a space they want to enter, and then you seal the exits. The gala, I said. Which one? The Architecture and Design Annual Gala. It's next Friday, 10 days before the vesting date. I'm the keynote speaker. It's a black tie event at the Palmer House. Hundreds of guests, press, high society. Marcus raised an eyebrow. And? Elena loves the spotlight. She wouldn't miss it. She'll want to play the part of the proud wife one last time. But she'll be bored. She always gets bored during the speeches. She usually slips away to the bar. And you think Julian will be there? I'll make sure he is, I said, a cold plan forming in my mind. I'll have the committee invite him, emerging local talent. We give away a grant every year. I'll rig the shortlist so he thinks he's being considered. He'll come sniffing for the money. Marcus whistled low. You put them in the same room with champagne, knowing they think they're secret? They are arrogant, Marcus. That's their weakness. If they are in the same room, dressed to the nines, thinking I'm busy on stage giving a speech about structural integrity, they won't be able to resist. They'll sneak off, a coat check, a balcony, a hotel room upstairs. And I'll have eyes on them every second. Marcus finished the thought. If they sneak off to a room at the Palmer House, we get the entry logs. We get the hallway footage. Hell, if they are loud enough, we get witness testimony. It's a risk, I said, but it forces the timeline. I can't wait 2 weeks hoping she slips up. I need to force the error. Marcus nodded slowly. It's aggressive. I like it. But are you ready for that, Ethan? You're going to be on stage delivering a speech, knowing your wife is likely cheating on you in the same building. I've built skyscrapers in hurricane zones, Marcus, I said, picking up the Oakhaven agreement. I know how to stand still while the wind howls. I looked at the vesting clause one last time. Forfeiture on breach. Draw up the paperwork, I told him. Prepare the filing. I want it ready to serve the second we get the proof. I want the locks changed on the house the same day. I want the credit cards frozen the minute the evidence is secured. Scorched earth, Marcus noted. She called me a backup plan, I said, heading for the door. I'm just proving her right. I'm the plan she should have worried about. I left Marcus's office and drove home. It was late, nearly 10 o'clock. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was dark except for the light in the master bedroom. I entered the house, the familiar scent of lavender and expensive candles greeting me. It felt like walking into a museum exhibit of a life I used to live. I walked up the stairs, loosening my tie. Elena was in bed reading a magazine. She looked up and smiled, setting the magazine down. You're late. Was the hearing awful? Exhausting, I lied smoothly, but necessary. We got the approval. That's wonderful, darling, she said. Oh, I forgot to tell you. I transferred some money from the joint account today. Just a deposit for the winter renovation on the sunroom. The contractor needed it to book the materials. I paused while unbuttoning my shirt. The sunroom. Another project for a house she intended to leave. Another lie. The money wasn't for a sunroom. It was for Julian. How much, Onaimas asked, keeping my voice casual. 10,000, she said, watching me closely. Is that okay? $10,000. My money. Going to the man who was screwing my wife. I turned to her and smiled. A genuine, sharp smile. Of course, Elena. Whatever you need to make the house perfect. It's an investment, right? Right, she beamed, relieved. An investment. By the way, I said, tossing my shirt into the hamper. Next Friday is the gala. I checked the guest list. It's going to be a big night. I want you to buy a new dress. Something spectacular. I want everyone looking at you. Her eyes lit up. Vanity was her vice, and I was feeding it. Really? I saw this beautiful emerald gown at Saks. Get it, I said. Get the shoes too. Let's make it a night to remember. She practically purred with delight, snuggling back into the pillows. She thought I was the doting, oblivious husband handing her gifts. She didn't realize I was dressing her for her own execution. I climbed into bed and turned off the lamp. Good night, Elena. Good night, Ethan. I lay there in the dark, listening to her breathe. The countdown had begun. 10 days. 10 days until the gala. 10 days until the trap snapped shut. The Oak Haven agreement was no longer just a piece of paper in a safe. It was a guillotine blade, hoisting slowly into position. And Elena had just volunteered to put her head on the block. Time is usually a fluid concept, moving faster when you are happy and dragging when you are in pain. But for the next 10 days, time became a physical object, a countdown clock ticking in the center of my chest. The house became a stage and we were method actors locked in a performance of domestic bliss. Every morning I woke up, made coffee, and kissed Elena on the cheek. Every evening I asked about her day and listened to her fabricated stories, with the patience of a saint. The discipline required was excruciating. I had to suppress the urge to vomit every time she called me honey, every time she touched my arm with that fake distracted tenderness. Elena, emboldened by my apparent obliviousness, began to get careless. Or perhaps she was just arrogant. She started dismantling our life right in front of my eyes, piece by piece, like a thief slowly emptying a museum while the guards were still on duty. It started with the small things. On Tuesday, I noticed the silver candelabras from the dining room were missing. They were antiques, a wedding gift from her aunt. When I asked about them, she didn't even look up from her phone. Oh, I took them to be polished, she said, scrolling through Instagram. They were looking so tarnished. I want the house to look perfect for the holidays. The holidays. A future that wouldn't exist for us. On Thursday, it was her designer handbags. I walked into her closet to retrieve a tie and noticed the top shelf was bare. The limited edition Birkins, the Chanels, at least $50,000 in leather goods, were gone. I'm doing a closet cleanse, she shouted from the bathroom when she heard me rummaging. Sending some old things to consignment. You know, decluttering the energy. Good idea, I called back, staring at the empty shelf. Make room for the new. She wasn't consigning them. She was moving them. She was likely stashing them at Julian's studio or a storage unit, securing her liquid assets before the bomb dropped. She was stripping the copper wiring out of the walls before burning the house down. I went to work and channeled my rage into the trap. The Architecture and Design Gala was the premier event of the season, a black tie affair where the city's elite gathered to pat themselves on the back. As the keynote speaker and a primary donor, I had significant leverage over the guest list. I sat in my office with my executive assistant, Sarah. She was efficient, sharp, and happily unaware of the domestic war I was waging. "We have the final RSVP list, Mr. Vance," Sarah said, handing me a tablet. "The mayor is confirmed. The board of trustees. Do you want to review the seating chart?" "Not yet," I said, scanning the list. "I want to add a nominee for the Emerging Visionary Grant. I felt we were a bit stale this year. We need some fresh blood, something disruptive." Sarah looked surprised. "The deadline for nominations was last week, sir." "Make an exception. I want to nominate the Vane Collective." Sarah typed the name into her notes. "Vane Collective? I haven't heard of them." "He's a local artist, Wicker Park. Very raw. I think it would look good for the firm to support the grassroots art scene. It shows we aren't just about corporate glass towers." I paused, leaning back in my chair. "Send him a personal invitation. Tell him he's been shortlisted for the $20,000 grant. Tell him the winner will be announced at the gala." "20,000?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "That's generous." "It's an investment," I said, using Elena's favorite word. "Make sure he knows attendance is mandatory for nominees." "I'll send the courier today." I watched her leave. The bait was in the water. $20,000 was a fortune to a man like Julian Vane. It was enough to pay off his debts, enough to buy more time. He wouldn't miss this. And if he was coming, Elena would be ecstatic. She would see it as a sign, her lover being recognized by her husband's world. She would think she had won everything. That night, the atmosphere in the house shifted. Elena was practically vibrating with energy. She met me at the door with a glass of scotch, wearing a silk robe. "You'll never guess what happened," she exclaimed, handing me the drink. "Tell me," I said, loosening my collar. "Julian, you know that artist I bought the painting from? The one you were skeptical about? The disruptive one?" I took a sip of the scotch. It burned pleasantly. "Yes, he just got nominated for the Visionary Grant at your gala. Can you believe it? I told you he was talented, Ethan. I told you he was going places." Her eyes were shining. She was so proud of him. It was sickening. She was celebrating her lover's success with her husband, unaware that her husband was the puppeteer pulling the strings. "That is a coincidence," I said smoothly. "The committee must have seen what you saw in him. You always did have an eye for value." "I'm so excited," she spun around, the silk of her robe flaring. "I bought the emerald dress, by the way. It's stunning. I'm going to look amazing next to you." Next to me. She meant next to him. She was dressing for Julian. She was planning to watch him win my money while wearing a dress I paid for. "I'm sure you will," I said. "I have to work in the study for a bit. Finish up my speech." "Don't work too late," she cooed, heading for the stairs. "I'll wait up." I went to the study, but I didn't write a speech. I called Marcus. "The invitation is sent," I told him. "He's coming." "We're ready," Marcus replied. "I have a team of 3 for the gala. 1 inside as a waiter, 2 in the lobby. We've also tapped into the hotel's security feed. Don't ask how. If they leave the ballroom, we will know." "And the paperwork?" "Drafted and notarized. The moment you give the signal, we file. I also have the team ready to secure the house. As soon as you leave for the gala on Friday, my guys will go in and change the locks. When she tries to come home that night, well, she won't be coming home." "Good." "Ethan," Marcus paused, "you're cutting it close. The gala is Friday. The vesting date is the following Monday. If this blows up in your face, if they don't cheat, or if they don't get caught, you're out of time." "They will," I said with absolute certainty. "They are greedy, and greed makes people stupid." The days bled into one another. Wednesday, Thursday. Thursday night was the hardest. It was the night before the execution. Elena was in a frenzy of preparation. She had a team of stylists coming to the house the next morning. She was packing a touch-up kit for the event, a small bag with makeup, perfume, and I noticed later when I checked it, a room key card. I held the plastic card in my hand. It was a generic key card, likely for the Palmer house. She must have booked a room already. She wasn't just hoping for a tryst. She had planned it. She intended to slip away during the speeches, meet Julian in a room upstairs, celebrate his win in bed, and then come back down for dessert. It was so brazen, so disrespectful. I put the key card back exactly where I found it. That night in bed, she turned to me. Her hand brushed my chest. "Ethan?" She whispered. "Hmm? Do you ever think about the future? Like, where we'll be in 10 years? It was a test, or maybe a pang of conscience. "I think about the future every day," I said, staring into the dark. "I build things to last, Elena. That's my job." "I know," she sighed, withdrawing her hand. "You're so solid." "Go to sleep," I said. "Big day tomorrow." She rolled over. Within minutes, her breathing evened out. She slept the sleep of the innocent or the sociopathic. I lay awake, listening to the wind rattle the window pane. I thought about the backup plan. I thought about the man she thought I was, the boring, safe, obsolete husband. Tomorrow she would see the other man, the architect who knew that the most important part of any demolition wasn't the explosion itself, but the way the structure collapsed into its own footprint, destroying nothing but itself. I closed my eyes. The countdown was over. The Palmer House Hilton is a Chicago institution, a gilded cavern of frescoes and velvet that smells of old money and history. On the night of the Architecture and Design Gala, it was suffocating. The air was thick with expensive perfume, the clink of crystal, and the drone of polite, meaningless conversation. I stood at the podium in the grand ballroom, the spotlight blindingly bright in my eyes. Thousands of faces were turned toward me, a sea of tuxedos and gowns. In the front row, center stage, sat Elena. She was breathtaking in the emerald silk dress I had paid for, her hair swept up to reveal the diamond earrings that were technically still mine. Next to her, looking uncomfortable in an ill-fitting rental tuxedo, was Julian Vane. I had orchestrated the seating chart with sadistic precision. I placed the emerging visionary nominees at the head table. I wanted a front row seat to their deceit. "Architecture is not merely about aesthetics," I said into the microphone, my voice echoing through the hall. "It is about integrity. A building can have the most beautiful facade in the world, but if the foundation is compromised, if the load-bearing walls are weak, it will inevitably collapse. Gravity, like the truth, always wins in the end." I made direct eye contact with Elena. She smiled, clapping politely, but her eyes were darting sideways to Julian. They exchanged a look, a quick, hungry glance that screamed of conspiracy. "And so," I continued, "we honor those who build with truth." The applause washed over me. I stepped down from the podium and took my seat next to my wife. "Wonderful speech, darling," Elena whispered, placing a hand on my knee. Her palm was damp. "You were so intense." "It's a passionate subject," I replied, taking a sip of water. I checked my watch. 8:45 p.m. "I'm going to run to the ladies' room before the main course," Elena said, standing up abruptly. She grabbed her clutch, the one containing the key card I had seen earlier. "Hurry back," I said. "They're announcing the grant winner soon." She didn't look back. Moments later, Julian Vane checked his phone, feigned a cough, and stood up. "Excuse me," he muttered to the table at large. "Need some air." They were gone. I didn't follow them. I didn't need to. In my pocket, my phone vibrated. A text from Marcus. "Target acquired. Room 412. Video feed active. Audio clear. We have them." I sat there, surrounded by the elite of Chicago, eating a salad of heirloom tomatoes, while upstairs in room 412, my marriage was being formally dismantled. I visualized the scene based on the blueprints Marcus and I had drawn up. They would be frantic, fueled by the adrenaline of the risk and the arrogance of their assumed safety. They were creating the very evidence that would destroy them. 30 minutes later, they returned separately. Elena was first, her cheeks flushed, her lipstick reapplied a shade too perfectly. Julian followed 10 minutes later, looking smug. When the winner of the visionary grant was announced, it wasn't Julian. I had made sure of that. It was a young structural engineer from the South Side. I watched Julian's face crumble as the name was read. He didn't clap. He looked at Elena with panic. He needed that money. Elena squeezed his arm under the table, a gesture of reassurance. Don't worry, she was telling him. We have the backup plan, just a few more days. The rest of the night was a blur of flashes and handshakes. I played the part of the triumphant keynote speaker. I smiled. I laughed. I held my wife's waist for the photographers. Inside, I was cold stone. I had the smoking gun. The trap was sprung. Now I just had to wait for the animal to realize it was caught. The next 10 days were a master class in psychological endurance. We went through the motions. The vesting date, November 1st, fell on a Monday. That morning I went to work as usual. Elena was humming in the kitchen, making pancakes, something she hadn't done in years. She was giddy. In her mind, the clock had struck midnight, and the pumpkin had turned into a golden carriage. She had survived the 5-year mark. The assets were now communal. She was rich. I spent the day at the office finalizing the paperwork with Marcus. Are you sure you want to do this tomorrow? Marcus asked as we reviewed the petition one last time. Yes, I said. Let her have today. Let her feel the victory. It will make the fall harder. Tuesday evening, November 2nd. I came home early. The house was strangely quiet, but there were suitcases in the hallway. 3 large Louis Vuitton trunks, packed and waiting by the door. I walked into the living room. Elena was sitting on the sofa, her posture rigid, her hands folded in her lap. She wasn't wearing her wedding ring. Ethan, she said, her voice steady, we need to talk. I set my briefcase down and loosened my tie. Okay, what's going on, Elena? Going on a trip? I'm leaving, she said. It wasn't a question, it was a declaration. She stood up and began to pace, launching into the speech she had clearly rehearsed in the mirror 100 times. I've been unhappy for a long time, Ethan. We've grown apart. You're married to your work. You're cold. You're distant. I feel like I'm living in a museum, not a home. I need passion. I need to find myself. Find yourself? I asked, leaning against the doorframe. Or find Julian? She didn't flinch. She was prepared for this. This isn't about anyone else, she lied effortlessly. This is about us. This is about me needing to be true to who I am. I can't be the wife you want me to be anymore. She took a breath and then came the pivot, the business transaction masquerading as emotional closure. I've already spoken to a lawyer, she said, lifting her chin defiantly. Since we've passed the 5-year mark, our assets are communal under the state law and the prenuptial terms. I'm not asking for everything. I just want what's fair. Half the house, half the portfolio, and the spousal support as outlined in the agreement. I want to make this amicable, Ethan. I don't want to fight. Amicable, I repeated. You want half of everything I've built, half of my family's legacy, because you're unhappy? It's the law, she shrugged, a gesture of feigned helplessness. I put 5 years of my life into this marriage. That has value. And the suitcases, I pointed to the hall. I'm staying at a hotel tonight, she said. I think it's best if we have some space while the lawyers work out the details. I'll send movers for the rest of my things later. She looked at me with a mix of pity and triumph. In her eyes, I was the defeated man, the workaholic husband who had lost his trophy wife because he didn't pay enough attention. She thought she was walking out the door with $10 million and a clean conscience. You're leaving tonight? I asked. Yes, my Uber is 5 minutes away. And Julian, I asked again, is he picking you up? Stop it, she snapped, her mask slipping for a fraction of a second. I told you, this isn't about him. Stop being paranoid. This is exactly why I'm leaving. You treat people like projects, not humans. Okay, I said. I walked over to the side table and poured myself a drink. My hand was steady. If you want to leave, Elena, I won't stop you. Relief washed over her face. She had expected a fight. She had expected begging. My resignation confused her, but she chalked it up to my defeat. Thank you for being reasonable, she said, picking up her purse. My lawyer will contact you in the morning. Actually, I said, taking a sip of the bourbon, let's meet tomorrow, in person. If we're going to do this, let's do it right. Come to my lawyer's office at noon. We can sign the separation agreement and the initial asset division. Protocols, you can bring your representation. She hesitated. Tomorrow? That's fast. You want the money, don't you? You want to start your new life? Let's not drag it out. The sooner we sign, the sooner the funds are released. Greed. It was the only lever I needed to pull. Okay, she nodded. Noon. Where? Thorne and Associates, West Loop. I'll be there. She walked past me toward the door. As she reached for the handle, she paused and looked back. I did love you, Ethan. Once. In the beginning. It was the cruelest line of the night because it might have been the only true one, and it was used to justify the knife she was twisting in my back. Goodbye, Elena, I said. The door clicked shut. I heard the wheels of her suitcases rolling down the driveway. I heard a car door slam. I stood in the silence of the foyer. The house was empty. The load-bearing wall of my life had just walked out. But the house didn't collapse. It stood firm. I finished my drink and walked to the security panel. I punched in the code to arm the system. Then I took out my phone and called Marcus. She's gone, I said. Did she give the speech? Marcus asked. Word for word. She thinks she's entitled to half. She's meeting us at noon tomorrow. Perfect, Marcus said. I have the conference room prepped. The evidence is queued up on the monitor. And Ethan? Yeah. I hope you're ready to watch a train wreck. I'm not just watching it, Marcus, I said, staring at the empty space where her suitcases had been. I'm driving the train. I went upstairs to the bedroom. It smelled like her perfume. I stripped the sheets off the bed, bundled them up, and threw them in the trash. I remade the bed with fresh, crisp white linens. I slept soundly for the first time in 2 weeks. The backup plan was deactivated. The primary protocol was now in effect. Total system purge. Tomorrow at noon, Elena Vance would learn the difference between a wife and a liability. And she would learn that in the world of contracts, the fine print is the only thing that matters. The morning of the meeting, the sky over Chicago was a piercing, cloudless blue. It was the kind of cold that clarified things, stripping away the haze and leaving only sharp edges and hard lines. I dressed with the same meticulous attention to detail I applied to my blueprints. A charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt, a tie the color of steel. I wasn't dressing for a divorce settlement. I was dressing for a funeral. Specifically, the funeral of Elena's delusions. I arrived at Thorne & Associates 15 minutes early. Marcus met me in the lobby. The firm was housed in a converted meatpacking warehouse in the West Loop, a building of exposed brick and industrial beams that felt more like a fortress than a law office. They're on their way, Marcus said, handing me a black coffee. He didn't smile. Marcus never smiled when blood was in the water. Her lawyer is Simon Keller. High volume, high fee, specializes in equitable distribution. He thinks this is a standard rubber stamp job. He sent over a draft agreement this morning asking for the house, a lump sum of $4 million, and 60 months of spousal support. $4 million, I repeated, the number rolling off my tongue without emotion. She really believes she hit the lottery. She believes the contract is ironclad because the date on the calendar says November 3rd, Marcus said, leading me toward the conference room. She thinks the vesting period is a finish line. Cross it and you're safe. She forgot that in a race, you can still be disqualified after you cross the finish line if you cheated on the track. We entered the conference room. It was the same room where we had plotted this. The glass table gleaming under the pendant lights. At the center of the table sat a single thick file folder, the evidence. I want the blinds open, I said, gesturing to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the street. Why? Marcus asked. Glare. Because she didn't come alone, I said. I want to see the getaway car. I walked to the window and looked down. The street was lined with expensive sedans and SUVs, the standard camouflage of the neighborhood. But there, parked illegally in a loading zone across the street, was a battered vintage convertible, a Carmen Ghia that had seen better decades. It was painted a pretentious shade of cream, rusting at the wheel wells. Julian. He was sitting in the driver's seat, wearing sunglasses, drumming his fingers on the doorframe. He looked impatient. He was waiting for his payload. He was waiting for Elena to walk out of this building with a signature that would fund his gallery, his debts, and his lifestyle for the next decade. He's here, I said, turning back to the room. She brought him. She couldn't even wait until the ink was dry. Arrogance, Marcus muttered, taking his seat at the head of the table. Sit down, Ethan. Let's play this out. 5 minutes later, the receptionist buzzed. Mr. Vance, Mrs. Vance, and Mr. Keller are here. Send them in. The heavy oak doors swung open. Elena walked in first. She looked spectacular. I had to give her that. She was wearing a cream power suit that matched the car outside, a subtle, synchronized wardrobe choice that only I would notice. She radiated a toxic mix of relief and triumph. She looked like a woman who had just survived a war and was here to collect her medal. Behind her was Simon Keller, a man who looked like he was made of hair gel and aggressive aftershave. He carried a leather briefcase and wore a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Ethan, Elena said, nodding politely. Her voice was cool, detached. You look well. Elena, I replied, not standing up. Mr. Keller. Mr. Vance, Keller said, shaking Marcus's hand and then taking the seat opposite me. Let's make this quick and painless, shall we? My client has been through enough emotional distress. We're looking for a clean break, standard adherence to the prenuptial terms regarding the 5-year vesting schedule. Elena sat down, placing her designer bag on the table. She glanced at the folder in the center of the table, assuming it contained the settlement checks. I just want to move on, Ethan, she said, clasping her hands. I know this is hard for you. I know you feel abandoned. But we have to be adults. The contract is clear. We passed the 5-year mark 2 days ago. The assets are communal. I looked at her. Really looked at her. I searched for a trace of the woman I had married, the woman who had cried at our wedding, the woman who had sworn to be my partner. I saw nothing. I saw a stranger with a calculator behind her eyes. You're right, Elena, I said softly. The contract is very clear. Keller opened his briefcase and slid a document across the glass. This is the separation agreement. It outlines the division of the primary residence, the liquidation of the stock portfolio to cover the cash settlement, and the alimony schedule. Sign here, here, and here, and Elena will waive her right to claim future earnings from your firm. He spoke with the bored confidence of a man who had done this 1,000 times. He thought he was dictating terms to a defeated husband who just wanted the pain to stop. I didn't touch the paper. I just stared at Elena. Is Julian waiting outside Warnone? I asked. The room went deadly silent. Elena froze. Her eyes widened slightly, a crack in the porcelain facade. Keller frowned, looking between us. Excuse me? Keller said. That's irrelevant. Is he? I asked again, my voice level. The cream convertible across the street. Is that him? Is he waiting to drive you to the bank? Elena stiffened. I don't know what you're talking about. I took an Uber. Don't lie, Elena. I said, leaning forward. Not here. Not today. It's beneath you. You brought your lover to your divorce settlement. It's tacky. Ethan, stop it, she hissed, her face flushing pink. This is exactly why I left. Your jealousy, your paranoia, you're imagining things. Am I? I looked at Marcus. He gave a microscopic nod. We aren't here to discuss my personal life post-separation, Elena said, rallying her confidence. She looked at Keller for support. Simon, tell him to sign the papers. Mr. Vance, Keller interjected, his voice stern. My client's associations after the date of separation are none of your business. The marriage is irretrievably broken. We are here to execute the financial terms of the prenuptial agreement. Unless you want to contest this in court, which will cost you significantly more in legal fees and public reputation, I suggest you sign. I agree, I said. We should execute the terms of the prenuptial agreement, strictly. Good, Keller said, uncapping a fountain pen. Then we are on the same page. Not quite, Marcus spoke up for the first time. His voice was like grinding stones. You're operating under the assumption that the vesting period completed successfully on November 1st. Keller paused, the pen hovering over the paper. The date is November 3rd. The 5 years are up. That is a fact of the calendar. The calendar is irrelevant, Marcus said, if the conditions of the contract were breached prior to the date. Elena laughed. It was a nervous, high-pitched sound. Breached? What are you talking about? I was a faithful wife for 5 years. I cooked his meals. I hosted his parties. I lived in his house. Faithful, I repeated the word, tasting the bitterness of it. Yes, faithful, she snapped, her eyes narrowing. Unlike you, who were married to your blueprints. Just because I have a friend who supports me doesn't mean... A friend, I interrupted. Julian Vane, the artist, the recipient of $20,000 of my money over the last 3 months, the man whose rent you paid on October 15th. Elena's face went white. The blood drained out of her so fast she looked like she might faint. She gripped the edge of the table. You looked at my accounts? She whispered. I looked at my accounts, I corrected. The accounts you used to fund your affair. Keller looked at Elena, his confidence wavering. Elena, is this true? Did you transfer funds? It was a loan, she stammered, looking at her lawyer. It was an investment. Ethan knows I invest in art. He encouraged it. Investments have paperwork, I said. Affairs have receipts. You have nothing, she spat, her anger returning as a defense mechanism. You have paranoia and a few bank transfers. That proves nothing. You can't stop the vesting. I want my money, Ethan. If you don't sign this right now, I will sue you for everything. I will tell the press you were abusive. I will ruin your reputation. There it was. The threat. The final card of the backup plan. If the money didn't come easy, she would take it by force. She was willing to burn my career to the ground to get what she wanted. I stood up slowly. I walked to the window and looked down one last time. Julian was checking his watch, leaning against the car. He had no idea that the woman he was waiting for was currently standing on a trap door that had already opened. You want to talk about the contract, Elena? I asked, turning back to face her. Let's talk about Clause 8B. Clause 8B, Keller asked, flipping through his copy of the agreement. The morality investing protocol, Marcus supplied helpfully. Specifically, the forfeiture of all unvested assets in the event of infidelity proven before the vesting date. You can't prove anything, Elena shouted, standing up. I didn't sleep with him. We are just friends. You're bluffing. Sit down, Elena, I said. Voice was quiet, but it carried enough weight that she actually obeyed. She sank back into the chair, her chest heaving. I'm not bluffing, I said. I'm an architect. I don't build on shaky ground. I reached for the thick folder in the center of the table. The room felt small, pressurized. The silence was absolute. Elena's eyes were locked on the folder. She knew. Somewhere deep down in the reptile part of her brain, she knew what was inside. You thought you made it to the finish line, I said, my hand resting on the cover. You thought if you just held your breath until November 1st, the past wouldn't matter. But you made a mistake. You got greedy. You wanted the celebration before the victory. Open it, Marcus said to Keller. I slid the folder across the glass. It stopped inches from Elena's hands. What is this? She whispered. This, I said, is the reason you're walking out of here with nothing. Elena stared at the folder. For a second, she hesitated. Then with a trembling hand, she flipped it open. The interception was complete. The ball was in my hands, and I was about to run it back for a touchdown. The sound of a folder opening is usually insignificant. A soft rustle of paper, a friction of cardboard against glass. But in that silent conference room, it sounded like the cracking of a structural beam. Elena stared down at the contents, her breath hitching in her throat. The color that had returned to her face during her argument with Marcus drained away instantly, leaving her skin the color of old parchment. Spread out before her were high-definition stills taken from the security feed of the Palmer House Hilton on the night of the gala. Photo 1. Elena and Julian Vane entering the elevator in the lobby. Timestamp, October 24th, 8:52 p.m. Photo 2. Elena and Julian walking down the corridor of the 4th floor, her hand resting intimately on the small of his back. Photo 3. Julian swiping a key. Card into the lock of room 412. Photo 4. The door closing behind them. And then the kill shot. A transcript of the audio recorded from inside the room, captured by the bug Marcus's team had planted earlier that day. It wasn't graphic. I didn't need graphic. It was damning in its mundane cruelty. Elena, he suspects nothing. He was so busy with his speech. Julian, when do we get the money? Elena, November 1st. Just hold on. Once the vesting clears, I'm free. We'll be set. Elena's hand hovered over the transcript. She read the words, her own words, and she looked like she had been struck physically. This is illegal, she whispered, her voice shaking. She looked up at me, eyes wide with panic. You spied on me. This is inadmissible. You can't use this. Actually, Marcus interjected, his voice calm and terrifyingly professional. Illinois is a two-party consent state for audio recording in private spaces, generally speaking. However, the Palmer House corridor is a semi-public space, and the reasonable expectation of privacy argument is complicated when you are committing fraud against a marital contract. But we don't need the audio for court, Elena. The video of you entering a hotel room with a man who isn't your husband, combined with the financial records of you paying his rent, establishes bad faith beyond a reasonable doubt. Simon Keller, her lawyer, leaned over and looked at the photos. He adjusted his glasses. He read the transcript. Then he slowly closed his own file, the one containing her demands for half my fortune. He sat back in his chair, exhaling a long, weary sigh. He knew. In that moment, he knew his client was dead in the water. "Simon, do something!" Elena shrieked, grabbing his arm. "Tell them this is fake. Tell them they can't do this." Keller gently removed her hand from his sleeve. "Mrs. Vance, is that you in the photos?" "We were just talking," she lied, the desperation making her voice shrill. "We went to the room to discuss his art. He was upset about not winning the grant." "For 90 minutes?" I asked, breaking my silence. "You discussed art in a hotel room for 90 minutes while your husband was downstairs giving a speech about integrity? And the comment about the vesting clearing? Was that art criticism too?" She glared at me, hatred radiating from her in waves. "You set me up. You invited him. You wanted this to happen." "I provided the opportunity," I corrected. "You provided the betrayal. I just tested the structure, Elena. You're the one who failed the stress test." Marcus cleared his throat and tapped the Oak Haven Agreement, which lay open to page 42. "Let's discuss the implications," Marcus said. Clause 8b, forfeiture on breach. Because these events took place on October 24th, 7 days prior to the vesting date of November 1st, the vesting schedule is null and void. You did not complete the 60 months of continuous, faithful union. Therefore, the Class A assets, the house, the investment portfolio, the spousal support trust, never transferred. They remain the sole property of Ethan Vance. Elena looked at the paper, then at Keller. "What does that mean, Simon? What do I get?" Keller took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked at me, then at Marcus, silently acknowledging the checkmate. He turned to his client. "It means," Keller said quietly, "that under the terms of this agreement, which you signed 5 years ago, you're entitled to nothing. No alimony, no lump sum, no equity in the house." "Nothing?" Elena's voice was barely a whisper. The reality was crashing down on her. The millions she had mentally spent, the life in New York, the freedom, it was all evaporating like mist. "Not exactly nothing," Marcus added, flipping a page. "There is the matter of the misappropriated funds. Clause 8c states that any joint funds used to facilitate a breach of contract must be repaid. By our calculation, you spent approximately $45,000 on Julian Vane's rent, studio fees, and art purchases over the last 6 months. Mr. Vance is entitled to seek reimbursement for that amount." "Reimbursement?" Elena stood up, knocking her chair back. "I don't have $45,000. I don't have anything. My accounts are joint." "Correction," I said coldly. "Your access was joint. The money was mine. And as of this morning, that access has been revoked." I reached into my pocket and pulled out her credit cards, the ones I had removed from her wallet while she was in the shower 2 days ago, replacing them with expired ones. I tossed them onto the glass table. They made a pathetic clicking sound. "The cards are canceled, Elena. The locks on the house were changed an hour ago. The car you drove to the hotel last night, the lease is in my name. I've notified the leasing company to repossess it." She stared at the cards. She looked at me with a mixture of horror and disbelief. You can't leave me with nothing. I'm your wife." "Technically," I said, leaning back and crossing my legs, "you are a breaching party in a contract dispute. The wife part ended when you called me a backup plan." "I never said that," she screamed, the tears finally starting to flow. Not tears of sorrow, but tears of fury and frustration. "I heard you," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. At the Meridian, in the hallway. Ethan is the insurance policy. Ethan is the backup plan. I heard every word, Elena. That was the moment you became obsolete. She froze. The memory of that phone call clearly came back to her. She realized then that I had known for weeks. I had sat through dinner, bought her gifts, and smiled at her across the pillow, all while holding the axe that was now severing her head. You monster, she hissed. You sociopath. You let me think I was safe. I treated you with the same respect you treated our marriage, I said. I played the game. I just played it better. I slid a single thin document across the table toward her. This is a quitclaim deed and a waiver of spousal support, I said. If you sign this now, acknowledging the breach and walking away, I will waive the repayment of the $45,000 you stole. I will also give you a one-time cash payment of $10,000 to help you get settled. Elsewhere. $10,000? She laughed hysterically. That's an insult. That won't even cover first and last month's rent in this city. Then move to a cheaper city, I said indifferently. Or ask Julian. I'm sure the dream can support you now. Elena looked at the window. Down on the street, Julian was still waiting in his rusting Carmen Ghia, drumming his fingers, waiting for his sugar mama to come out with the golden ticket. He had no idea she was about to walk out with nothing but debt and a suitcase of used clothes. Simon? Elena looked at her lawyer, pleading. We can fight this, right? We can go to court? Keller sighed. He began packing his briefcase. Mrs. Vance, we can go to court, but with this evidence and that prenup, you will lose, and you will be liable for Mr. Vance's legal fees, which will likely be in the hundreds of thousands. And during that time, you will have no access to funds. My advice? Take the $10,000, sign the waiver, cut your losses. It was the final nail. Her own lawyer was surrendering. Elena slumped into her chair. She looked small. The power suit, the makeup, the attitude, it all looked like a costume now. She was just a woman who had gambled everything on a lie and lost. She picked up the pen. Her hand was shaking so badly she could barely hold it. I hate you, she whispered, staring at the paper. The feeling is mutual, I said. Sign. She scratched her signature onto the line. It was a jagged, ugly scrawl. Marcus took the paper immediately, notarized it with a stamp, and slid a cashier's check for $10,000 across the table. Done, Marcus said. The marriage is dissolved. The assets are secured. You are free to go, Miss Vance. She stared at the check. $10,000. It was less than the cost of the dress she wore to the gala. It was a pittance, a severance package for a fired employee. She stood up slowly. She picked up the check and shoved it into her purse. She didn't look at me. She turned and walked toward the door. Elena, I called out just as her hand touched the handle. She stopped, her back to me. Don't forget to tell Julian, I said. I'd hate for him to be disappointed when he finds out the ATM is out of order. She didn't respond. She slammed the heavy oak door behind her, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silent room. I sat there for a moment, listening to the silence. It was over. The structure had been demolished. The dust was settling. Well, Marcus said, closing the file folder. That was efficient. Is it done? I asked. Legally? Ironclad, Marcus nodded. She signed the waiver. She took the payment. She has no claim. You kept the house, the money, the firm. You won, Ethan. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked down at the street. The door to the building opened, and Elena walked out. She looked lost for a moment, the sunlight hitting her face. Then she squared her shoulders and walked across the street to the cream convertible. I watched as she opened the passenger door and got in. I couldn't hear what was said, but I saw the body language. I saw her turn to Julian. I saw his smile fade. I saw him gesture wildly. Are you going to watch? Marcus asked, coming to stand beside me. I paid for the ticket, I said. I might as well watch the end of the show. I watched as the argument in the car escalated. The dream was colliding with reality. And I knew, with the certainty of a man who understands structural stress, that the little convertible couldn't hold the weight of their failure. From the fourth-floor window of Thorne & Associates, the world below looked like a moving schematic. People were reduced to vectors, cars to geometric shapes navigating a grid. I stood there, watching the cream-colored convertible, a vehicle that was more rust than nostalgia, vibrating against the curb. Inside that car, the final act of my marriage was playing out, but the sound was muted. I could see the frantic gestures. Elena was waving the cashier's check, the paper fluttering like a surrender flag. Julian Vane, the dream, was not embracing her. He was gripping the steering wheel, his head thrown back in what looked like a shout of frustration. He slammed his hand against the dashboard. "He's not taking the news well," Marcus noted, standing beside me, his voice devoid of sympathy. "I suspect he was banking on a six-figure injection to keep the wolves from his door." "He was banking on a phantom," I said. "He fell in love with a lifestyle, not a woman. Now that the lifestyle is gone, let's see how much of the love remains." The convertible pulled away from the curb aggressively, merging into traffic without signaling, nearly clipping a delivery truck. I watched until it disappeared around the corner of Randolph Street. It was done. The parasite had been detached, but the host, my life, still had some healing to do. "What now?" Marcus asked. "Now," I said, buttoning my jacket, "I go back to work. I have a skyscraper to build." 30 minutes later, across the city, the reality of obsolete began to set in for Elena. I didn't need to be there to see it. I knew the mechanics of the trap I had set. I had designed the financial collapse to be total and immediate. It wasn't just about cutting her off. It was about erasing the digital identity she had worn like a second skin for 5 years. Elena and Julian sat in the booth of a bistro in River North. It wasn't the Meridian. It wasn't the kind of place where they knew her name or her vintage preference. It was a loud, mid-tier lunch spot where the tables were too close together and the silverware was heavy and dull. $10,000, Julian repeated, staring at the check lying on the sticky table. His voice was flat, the charisma of the tortured artist replaced by the cold calculation of a debtor. "That's it? That's the settlement?" "He trapped me, Julian," Elena pleaded, her eyes red-rimmed. She reached for his hand, but he pulled it away to pick up his water glass. He had recordings. He had photos of us at the hotel. If I fought him, I would have ended up with nothing and a massive legal bill. This was the only way. "You said you had it handled," Julian hissed, leaning in so the neighboring table wouldn't hear. "You said he was a backup plan? You said he was oblivious. You said we'd have half the portfolio. Do you know what I owe the suppliers? Do you know I'm 2 months behind on the gallery rent?" "We can figure it out," she said, her voice trembling. "I have this check. It's $10,000. That can cover the rent for now. We can start over. I'm free, Julian. Isn't that what we wanted? To be together without hiding?" Julian looked at her. For the first time, Elena saw him clearly. She didn't see the soulful eyes of a visionary. She saw the desperate, shifting gaze of a man looking for an exit. He looked at the check, then at her designer suit, then back at the check. "We need a drink," Julian muttered. He signaled the waiter. "Bottle of champagne. The Veuve." "Julian, maybe we should save the—" "I said we need a drink," he snapped. They drank in silence. The champagne, usually a symbol of celebration, tasted acidic. Elena felt the walls closing in. She felt naked without the armor of her status. For 5 years, she had been Mrs. Ethan Vance. That name opened doors. It approved loans. It silenced critics. Now she was just Elena. When the bill came, Julian didn't move. He stared at the check, then at Elena. "You get this," he said. "I forgot my wallet in the car." It was a lie. A clumsy, lazy lie. But Elena didn't argue. She wanted to please him. She wanted to prove that she was still valuable, that she could still provide. "Of course," she said, forcing a smile. She reached into her purse and pulled out her wallet. She bypassed the canceled cards I had thrown on the table, the Platinum Amex, the black card, and reached for a backup Visa she kept for emergencies. It was a joint account card, but one she rarely used, hoping I might have overlooked it in the purge. She handed it to the waiter. "Keep the change," she said with a habituated grace she could no longer afford. The waiter walked away. Elena took a sip of champagne, trying to steady her. "Hands. We can stay at your place tonight," she suggested. "And tomorrow, I'll deposit the check and we can look for a new apartment. Something with a studio for you." Julian didn't answer. He was looking at the door. The waiter returned. He wasn't smiling anymore. He held the card between two fingers like it was a contaminated object. "Ma'am," he said, loud enough for the table next to them to turn their heads, "this card was declined." Elena froze. "That's impossible. Try it again." "I tried it 3 times, the waiter said. "The terminal says card reported lost or stolen. Confiscate. I can't give it back to you." "That's my card." She indignantly rose halfway out of her seat. "You can't keep it." "Store policy on a confiscation order," the waiter said, bored. "Do you have another form of payment?" Elena dug frantically into her wallet. She pulled out a debit card linked to the household operating account. "Try this one." The waiter sighed and walked away. Julian was now actively looking away, shielding his face with his hand as if shielding himself from the embarrassment of being seen with her. The waiter returned in 30 seconds. "Declined. Account frozen." A cold sweat broke out on Elena's neck. She looked at Julian. "Julian, do you have cash? I'll pay you back as soon as I cash the check." Julian slowly turned to look at her. His expression wasn't angry. It was disgusted. It was the look one gives to a tool that has broken in the middle of a job. "I told you," he said, standing up. "I don't have my wallet." "Sir, you can't leave." The waiter stepped in front of him. "She's paying," Julian pointed at Elena. "She's got a $10,000 check. Figure it out." He walked past the waiter and out the door. He didn't look back. He left her there in the middle of the lunch rush with a $200 bill and a stack of worthless plastic. "Ma'am," the waiter said, his voice hardening, "we need payment." Elena looked at the door where Julian had vanished. The abandonment was swift and total. She looked down at the cashier's check in her hand. I have this check," she stammered. "It's a cashier's check. It's good as cash." "We don't accept checks," the waiter said. "Cash or card." "I don't have anything else," she cried, her voice rising to a panic. My ex-husband, he shut everything off." The manager appeared, a stern man in a cheap suit. The scene was causing a disturbance. "Is there a problem?" "She can't pay," the waiter said. Elena felt the tears coming again, hot and humiliating. She opened her purse and dumped it on the table. Lipstick, tissues, a half-empty pack of mints, and a $20 bill. "Here," she pushed the $20 forward. "That's all the cash I have. Please, I'll come back tomorrow and pay the rest. I promise." The manager looked at the Rolex on her wrist. "A gift. From me for her 30th birthday." "Leave the watch," the manager said quietly. "What?" Elena clutched her wrist. "No, this is worth $10,000. "Then you should have no problem selling it to pay your tab," the manager said. "Leave the watch as collateral. Come back with the cash and you get it back. Otherwise, we call the police for theft of services." The police. The final indignity. Trembling, Elena unclasped the watch. The heavy gold weight left her wrist, leaving a pale strip of skin where it had been. She placed it on the table. It felt like paying a ransom for her own dignity. "I'll be back," she whispered. She grabbed her purse and the cashier's check and fled the restaurant. Outside, the wind off the lake was biting. She scanned the street for the cream convertible. It was gone. Julian hadn't waited. He hadn't circled the block. He had left her. She stood on the corner of Ohio Street, shivering in her power suit. She reached for her phone to call an Uber, then remembered the Uber account was linked to the Amex that was canceled. She opened the Lyft app, linked to the Visa, canceled. She stared at the screen. Payment method invalid. Please update. She couldn't get a ride. She couldn't book a hotel room. She couldn't even buy a coffee. She was standing in the middle of a city she had ruled for 5 years, and she was completely, utterly ghosted by the system. She was obsolete. The word echoed in her mind. Obsolete. I had used it as a legal term, a contractual definition. But standing there on the pavement, Elena understood the visceral reality of it. To be obsolete is to be without purpose, without function, and without connection to the power source. I had been the power source. I had been the grid she plugged into, and I had pulled the plug. She started to walk. She didn't know where she was going. The nearest bank was 6 blocks away. She walked in her high heels, the wind whipping her hair into her face. Passers-by glanced at her, a beautiful woman in a disheveled suit, clutching a purse like a life preserver, crying silently as she walked against the traffic. She wasn't a wife anymore. She wasn't a girlfriend anymore. She was just a pedestrian with a piece of paper in her pocket and nowhere to go. Back in my office, I received a notification on my phone. Alert, attempted transaction, Visa ending in 4509, amount 215 €. Merchant, Bistro Zinc, status, declined. I swiped the notification away. I turned back to the blueprints on my desk. The lines were clean, the angles precise. There was comfort in structure. There was safety in boundaries. I picked up my pen and went back to work. The demolition was complete. The site was cleared. It was time to focus on the new build. But I knew the story wasn't quite over. The rubble always shifts before it settles. Elena would try one last desperate maneuver. She had to. She had no other choice. And Julian? The dream was about to become a nightmare. Chicago in November is a city of sharp edges. The wind coming off the lake cuts through wool and denim alike, finding the bone. Elena Vance walked 6 blocks to the nearest Chase Bank branch, her heels clicking in uneven rhythm on the concrete. She had no coat. She had left it in the trunk of the Carman Ghia when she stepped out for the meeting. She hugged her blazer tight against her chest, her knuckles white, her face numb. Inside the bank, the warmth was jarring. She waited in line, sandwiched between a courier with a heavy bag of deposits and an elderly woman counting change. When she reached the teller, she slid the $10,000 cashier's check across the marble counter with a trembling hand. "I need to cash this," she said. Her voice sounded brittle. The teller, a young man with a name tag that read Kevin, looked at the check, then at her disheveled appearance. He typed something into his computer. "Do you have an account with us, ma'am?" "No," she said. "It's drawn on this bank. It's a cashier's check. It's guaranteed funds." "I understand," Kevin said, his tone officious. "But for a non-customer cashing a check this size, there are verification protocols. I'll need 2 forms of ID and a thumbprint. And there's a fee." "Just do it," she snapped. "Please." It took 20 minutes. 20 minutes of standing under the fluorescent lights, feeling the stares of the security guard. Finally, Kevin counted out the bills. $9,900 and some change minus the service fee. He placed the thick envelope in the tray. Elena grabbed it. It was the only leverage she had left. She walked out and hailed a taxi, an actual yellow cab since her apps were dead. She threw herself into the back seat. "Wicker Park," she told the driver. 1402 North Milwaukee, the Vane Collective. The ride was a blur of gray streets and exhaust fumes. Elena clutching the envelope of cash to her chest like a newborn. She was running on adrenaline and denial. Julian had left her at the restaurant because he was panicked, she told herself. He was an artist. He was emotional, volatile. He just needed to know she had the money. 10,000 wasn't millions, but it was enough to stop the eviction he was worried about. It was a start. They could build from this. The taxi pulled up to the gallery. The storefront was dark. The neon sign that usually buzzed with the words, "Disrupt, Create," was off. A sense of dread, heavy and cold, settled in her stomach. She paid the driver with a $50 bill from the envelope and didn't wait for change. She ran to the glass door. Locked, she pounded on the glass. "Julian!" she screamed. "Julian, open the door! It's me!" There was movement in the back. A light flickered on. Julian appeared from the shadows, wearing the same clothes from the meeting, looking disheveled and sullen. He saw her and hesitated. For a moment, she thought he wasn't going to open it. Then, with a look of resignation, he unlocked the deadbolt and pushed the door open. "What are you doing here?" he asked. He didn't step back to let her in. He stood in the doorway, a gatekeeper to a kingdom that was already crumbling. "I have the money," she said, holding up the envelope. "I cashed the check. It's here. Nearly $10,000. We can pay the rent. We can figure this out." She pushed past him into the gallery. It smelled of stale wine and turpentine. The space was chaotic. Canvases stacked haphazardly against the walls, bubble wrap strewn on the floor. It looked less like a studio and more like a place being abandoned. Julian closed the door and leaned against it, crossing his arms. He didn't look at the envelope. He looked at her with a detached curiosity, as if she were a specimen he had never seen before. 10,000, he repeated flatly. Do you know what my debt load is, Elena? We can manage it, she said, turning to face him, her eyes wide and pleading. I can get a job. I have connections. I was an event planner before I married Ethan. I can work. We can be a team. Julian laughed. It was a dry, hacking sound. He walked over to a small table where a bottle of whiskey sat and poured himself a glass. He didn't offer her one. A team, he mocked. You don't get it, do you? You still think this is a romance novel? He took a drink and pointed a finger at her. I didn't sign up for a team, Elena. I didn't sign up for a partner who needs a job. I signed up for a patron. I signed up for the wife of Ethan Vance, the woman with the black card and the endless line of credit. That was the deal. The words hit her like physical blows. She took a step back. The deal? You told me you loved me. You told me I was your muse. You were a muse because you paid the bills, he shouted, his facade finally cracking. You think I enjoyed listening to you complain about your boring, rich husband? You think I cared about your spiritual awakening? I tolerated it because every time you came over, you bought a painting or paid the rent. You were the investor. He walked toward her, invading her space. And now? Now the investor is bankrupt. You're not an asset anymore, Elena. You're a liability. You're a $40,000 lawsuit waiting to happen if Ethan decides to come after me for the money you stole. I didn't steal it, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I gave it to you because I believed in us. And look where that got us, he sneered. I'm packing up. The landlord served the eviction notice yesterday. I was hoping your settlement would clear the arrears so I could stay. But 10,000? He looked at the envelope in her hand with contempt. That doesn't even cover the interest on what I owe. So that's it? She asked, her voice trembling with rage. You used me. I destroyed my life for you. I gave up everything, my home, my reputation, my husband. Your husband, Julian scoffed. Let's talk about him. You called him a backup plan. You laughed about it. You said he was just a wallet you were waiting to empty. He leaned in close, his breath smelling of cheap whiskey. Takes one to know one, Elena. You were my backup plan. I was hoping my art would take off. It didn't. So I found a rich, bored housewife to subsidize me until it did. We were doing the exact same thing. The only difference is, I didn't get caught. You did. The cruelty of the mirror he held up to her was unbearable. She saw it then, the symmetry of their corruption. She had treated Ethan as a resource, and Julian had treated her as a resource. It was a food chain of exploitation, and she had just fallen to the bottom. Get out, Julian said, turning his back on her. I have to finish packing. I'm going back to Ohio. My brother said I can sleep on his couch. Ohio? She blinked. But what about me? Where am I supposed to go? Not my problem, he said, throwing a roll of tape into a box. Use your 10 grand. Get a motel. Find another rich guy. You're still pretty. Maybe you can find a widower before the looks fade. Something inside her snapped. The grief turned into a white-hot fury. She looked at the man she had destroyed her marriage for, this weak, selfish, mediocre man, and she screamed, You coward! She lunged at him, swinging her purse. It hit him in the shoulder, knocking the glass of whiskey from his hand. It shattered on the concrete floor. Julian spun around and shoved her. It wasn't a playful shove. It was hard. She stumbled back, her heels catching on the drop cloth, and fell onto the cold, hard floor. The envelope of cash slid out of her hand. Julian looked down at her. For a second, she thought he might hit her again. Instead, he bent down and picked up the envelope. Consider this a severance. Package, he said, shoving the money into his pocket. For services rendered. That's my money, she shrieked, scrambling to get up. Give it back. He grabbed her arm and dragged her toward the door. She kicked and clawed, but he was stronger. He opened the door and shoved her out onto the sidewalk. She landed on her hands and knees, the gritty pavement scraping her skin. Don't come back, Elena, he said, standing in the doorway. If I see you again, I'm calling the cops and telling them you're trespassing, and considering your current legal standing, I don't think you want to talk to the police. He slammed the door. She heard the lock click. then the deadbolt, then the lights went out. Elena sat on the sidewalk in Wicker Park. It was starting to rain, a cold, miserable drizzle that soaked into her suit instantly. Her knees were bleeding. Her hair was plastered to her face. She had no coat. She had no car. She had no money. The $10,000, her only lifeline, was gone, taken by the man she had sacrificed everything for. Passers-by walked around her, giving her a wide berth. To them, she was just another tragic figure in the city, maybe a drunk, maybe homeless. They didn't see the woman who, 24 hours ago, had slept in Egyptian cotton sheets and commanded a staff of housekeepers. She looked at her reflection in the darkened window of the gallery. She looked like a ghost. The word backup plan echoed in her mind again. She realized then that Ethan hadn't just defeated her legally. He had dismantled her reality. He had stripped away the illusion that she was special, that she was desirable, that she was safe. He had shown her that without the structure he provided, she was nothing but debris in the wind. She reached into her pocket. Her phone was dead. Even if it wasn't, who would she call? Her friends were Ethan's friends. Her family was distant, both geographically and emotionally. She had alienated them years ago with her arrogance. She was alone, truly, completely alone. She pulled her knees to her chest and began to rock back and forth. The rain mixed with her tears. She didn't scream anymore. She didn't have the energy. She just sat there shivering while the city of Chicago moved on around her, indifferent to her collapse. She had wanted to be free. She had wanted passion. She had wanted a life without the boring safety of Ethan Vance. Now she had it. She was free of the house, free of the marriage, free of the money. She was free to freeze to death on a sidewalk in November. Inside the gallery, she saw a shadow move. Julian was likely counting the money, perhaps booking a bus ticket to Ohio. He had survived. He was a cockroach. He would always survive. But Elena, she was an orchid. She needed a greenhouse to live, and the glass house had just been shattered. She closed her eyes and saw Ethan's face, not the cold face from the meeting, but the face from 5 years ago, looking at her with adoration, the face she had betrayed. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the wet pavement. But the pavement, like the contract, didn't care about apologies. It only cared about gravity, and she had hit the bottom. The silence of a house after a funeral is distinct. It has a weight, a density that presses against the eardrums. But the silence in my house that night wasn't heavy. It was clean. It was the silence of a sterile room after the contagion has been removed. I poured myself a glass of bourbon, a 20-year-old Pappy Van Winkle that I had been saving for our 10th anniversary. I didn't bother with ice. I stood in the center of the living room, the glass cool in my hand, and looked around. The house was a masterpiece of modern design, floor-to-ceiling windows, Italian marble floors, a cantilevered staircase that looked like it defied gravity. I had designed it for us. I had built it to be the container for a family, for a future. Now, it was just a building. I walked over to the fireplace and engaged the gas switch. The flames flickered to life, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. I sat in the leather armchair, my chair, and took a sip of the bourbon. It tasted like smoke and oak. It tasted like survival. There was no party. There were no balloons. Marcus had offered to take me out for a steak dinner to celebrate the kill, as he put it, but I had declined. I didn't feel like celebrating. Victory in a divorce isn't like winning a championship. It's like surviving a car crash. You might walk away with your life and your wallet, but you're still standing on the side of the road, looking at the wreckage of something you once drove with pride. I thought about Elena. By now, the reality would have fully set in. I checked the weather app on my phone. 42 degrees and raining. I knew she had no coat. I knew she had no active credit cards. I knew Julian Vane was a man of weak character who would fold the moment the money stopped flowing. I imagined her standing on a corner in Wicker Park, or perhaps sitting in a police station lobby if she had caused a scene. Did I feel pity? I searched my chest for it. I looked for that familiar pang of protectiveness that had defined the last 5 years of my life. It wasn't there. What I felt was the cold, mathematical satisfaction of an equation balancing out. She had introduced chaos into the system. I had applied a correction factor. The result was equilibrium. I stood up and walked through the house, turning on lights as I went. I needed to see it clearly. I walked into the kitchen where she used to pretend to cook before ordering takeout. I walked into the dining room where we had hosted dinner parties for people who didn't really like us. I walked up the stairs to the master bedroom. The bed was made, the sheets crisp and white. The closet door was open. I walked inside. Her side was empty. The hangers were the bare wire skeletons. The shelves where her shoes had been were dusty. It was strange how much space a person took up, not just physically, but psychically. With her things gone, the room felt twice as big, but also twice as cold. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the nightstand drawer. There in the back was a photo of us from our honeymoon in Bali. We were tan, smiling, holding cocktails on a beach. We looked happy. I looked at the photo for a long time. I wasn't looking at the love. I was looking for the lie. Was it there then? In the tilt of her head? In the way she held the glass? Or had she loved me then, before the boredom set in, before the backup plan mentality took root? It didn't matter. In architecture, we have a saying, the integrity of the structure is determined by the weakest joint. It doesn't matter how strong the steel beams are if the bolts holding them together are rusted. Our bolts were rusted. The collapse was inevitable. I just controlled the demolition. I took the photo out of the frame. I didn't tear it up. That would be too dramatic, too emotional. I simply walked into the bathroom and dropped it into the trash can. Then I dropped the frame in after it. I went back downstairs and picked up my phone. I dialed a number I had saved earlier that day. Hello? A voice answered on the second ring, professional and alert despite the late hour. Linda, it's Ethan Vance. Ethan, my goodness, it's late. Is everything all right? Do you need something for the firm? Linda was the top real estate broker in the city. She had sold me this lot 6 years ago. I need to list the house, Linda. There was a pause on the other line. Your house? The lakefront property? Ethan, that's your masterpiece. Are you sure? I'm sure. I want it on the market by Monday. Private listing, high net worth clients only. I don't want open houses. I want it sold fast. Okay, Linda said, her voice shifting into business mode. The market is hot right now. We can get a premium for it. But where will you go? I'll get a condo in the city, and I said, something smaller, something closer to the office, something with less maintenance. Understood. I'll have the paperwork over to you in the morning. Thank you, Linda. I hung up. Selling the house was the final step. I couldn't live here. This house was a monument to a dead marriage. Every corner, every light fixture, every tile was a decision we had made together. I needed a clean slate. I needed a white box. I walked to my study, the one room in the house that had always been truly mine. I sat at my drafting table. A fresh sheet of vellum was taped to the surface. My pencils were sharpened and aligned in a perfect row. I picked up a pencil. The weight of it was familiar, comforting. I thought about the word obsolete. Elena had used it to describe her fear of being discarded. She had projected that fear onto me, calling me the backup plan to insulate herself from the reality that she was the one who was replaceable. She thought she was the prize, the content, the art. She thought I was just the frame. But she forgot that without the frame, the canvas has nowhere to hang. Without the foundation, the decoration crumbles. She was gone. The parasite had been excised, and I was still here. I was still the architect. I still had my firm, my reputation, my money, and my self-respect. I looked at the blank paper. For 5 years, I had been designing additions to a structure that was fundamentally flawed. I had been shoring up walls that wanted to fall. I had been patching cracks that went down to the bedrock. Now the site was cleared. I started to draw. Not a house, not a home. I drew a line, a single, strong, vertical line, then a horizontal one, an axis, a new foundation. I didn't know what I was building yet. It might be a tower, it might be a fortress, it might be a sanctuary. But whatever it was, it would be built on truth. It would be built on steel that didn't bend and concrete that didn't crack. It would be built for one. I worked through the night. The silence of the house became a rhythm, a companion. Outside, the rain stopped and the clouds broke. The first gray light of dawn began to filter through the windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I put down my pencil. I stood up and walked to the window. The sun was rising over Lake Michigan, painting the water in shades of iron and gold. The city of Chicago was waking up. The traffic on Lakeshore Drive was picking up. People going to work, people moving forward, people living their lives. Somewhere out there, Elena was waking up, if she had slept at all. She was waking up to a world where she was no longer Mrs. Vance. She was waking up to the consequences of her own audit. She was waking up to find that the backup plan had become the only reality, and she had been locked out of it. I took a final sip of the bourbon, now warm and flat. I set the glass down on the windowsill. I turned my back on the view and walked out of the room. I walked down the hall, grabbed my coat, and picked up my briefcase. I opened the front door and stepped out into the cold, clean morning air. I locked the door behind me. The heavy thud of the bolt sliding home was the most satisfying sound I had heard in years. I walked to my car, got in, and started the engine. I didn't look back at the house. I pulled out of the driveway and merged into the traffic, heading toward the skyline I had helped build. The backup plan was finished. The main project was just beginning.